Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Capital Budget Subcommittee meeting. On behalf of Vice Chair Lewis and the entire Capital Budget Subcommittee, we welcome everyone here today. We will start off with a capital budget fiscal briefing presented by Mr. Matthew Klein of the Department of Legislative Services. Mr. Klein.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Capital Budget Subcommittee. We're going to begin, like most briefings, on page 1 of the document. Hopefully you've got this available to you. I know it was just posted about an hour or so ago. So page 1 compares the proposed fiscal 26 budget relative to what the current fiscal 25 budget is. It also compares what was planned in the 5-year CIP. Overall, the budget is $3,067 million. This is roughly $292 million less than what was funded in fiscal 2025. But as you can see, as we walk down through the various sources of what contribute to the capital budget, the changes are ostensibly in fluctuations in the built-to-learn bonds that the state is authorizing through lottery and an adjustment in federal funds, ostensibly because the state has finished, the feds have finished funding the state's broadband initiative, which accounted for $172 million in fiscal 25. And there's also something that I'll discuss later, an adjustment in the federal funds for anticipated for the new vets home, which is essentially on hold. If you look at the general funds, or what we consider the state funds, the general, the bond premiums, the recycled GO bond funds, and the general obligation bond funds authorized for fiscal 2026, the budget is ostensibly the same as the fiscal 2025 budget. However, it is about $246 million above what was planned for fiscal 2026 in last year's CIP. This comes from an additional amount of general funds which are being contributed to the budget that I'll touch on a little bit later, and the inclusion of bond premiums, which were primarily not used in last year's budget. There is a small amount that's being proposed as a deficiency, and that reflects the $5 million you see under 2025. And the amount of new authorizations remains at the $1.75 billion level that the Spending Affordability Committee had recommended for the 2025 session. Turning to page 2, this takes that same data and just breaks it down into the various uses that the state, that we put these into various groups. You can see the highest level of funding is traditionally provided to education, environment, higher education, and housing. You can see those are ostensibly the same as what was funded last year, particularly when you take into account the reduction in federal funds, particularly in housing for the broadband initiative. You'll note that there's a significant amount of local project funding in the budget. While it's substantially less than the amount provided in 2025, it is substantially greater than the amount that was programmed in the 5-year CIP, since we generally do not program commitments for miscellaneous projects. And then on page 3, there's another exhibit that this just shows the 5-year, previous 5 years relative to fiscal 2026. And you can see from this that there was an expansion of the capital program that began really in fiscal 2022. Was pretty large in 23 and 24, and now you're seeing that level off. Now, a couple things to note from here is that if you look at the state dollars, which is the bottom 3 bars, you can see that expansion begin again in fiscal 2022. But looking at 2026, essentially that is level funded, as I'd said earlier, to the 2025 level as we're approaching a different fiscal climate. In 2023 and 2024, there was a significant amount of general funds which contributed to the budget because we had a fund balance. And when that disappeared and the state's fiscal climate changed, the Spending Affordability Committee last year recommended adjusting the state's 5-year plan to remove the proposed general fund spending over the 5-year plan and replace that with GO bond funds, which is where you get the $1.75 billion authorization level for 25 and 26 compared to a much lower level in the previous years, essentially swapping out what we had anticipated to spend in general funds and instead using the state's GO bond capacity to do that. On page 4 begins a section of various highlights in the budget. The chart on page 4 gives you a perspective of where the state is with respect to the debt affordability criteria. There's a criteria that the state's debt be no more than 8% of revenues, the state's tax-supported debt, that is. And you can see that even with the expansion in the GO bond, we are well within the 8% limit, projected to be just above 6% all the way out into 2030. You do see, though, that debt service is growing in the out years, and of course this is ostensibly from the increased authorization level, which began last year and continues into this year and is programmed in the 5-year CIP. Now, this is a little bit different from what the Spending Affordability Committee had recommended last year, where they had recommended annual 2% increases in the GO bond authorization level. But given the state's fiscal climate, the Spending Affordability Committee for the 2025 session recommended holding the authorizations level at $1.75 billion. Turning to page 5, the first bullet. I would be remiss if we moved on from the state's debt picture if I did not point out that the state has increased the capital program through other means, ostensibly through the use of lottery bonds. Since 2019, the state has authorized about $4.5 billion of lottery-backed bonds. And this has caught the attention of the rating agencies. If you read the analysis that Department of Legislative Services provides for the debt, from Patrick Frank, you'll have a larger discussion of that. But in Appendix 1 does include a summary of what the rating agencies have assessed our amount of debt outstanding is relative to what we think our debt outstanding is, and it is significantly more because of the lottery-backed bonds, which the state does not include as state-supported debt. We're within the limits we're in either of those scenarios, but again, the rating agencies have taken notice, particularly Moody's. An essential feature of the budget for fiscal 2026 is the use of bond premiums. It's not unordinary for the state to use bond premiums to support the capital program, but the last couple of years, the decision has been to use the bond premiums to offset debt service. Instead, the budget this year uses a portion of the bond premiums from both the bond sale from June of 2024 and the proposed bond sale for June of 2025 to support the capital program to the tune of about $140 million of fiscal 2026 spending and a deficiency appropriation of $5 million to get to the $145 million of bond premium that support essentially the 2026 capital program. Appendix 2 provides a summary of sort of the more recent use of bond premiums to support the capital program, so you can get a sense that it is not unordinary for the state to do so. On page 5 and continue on to page 6, there's a discussion of the general fund component of the capital program. The state's fiscal situation, precludes a heavy use of general funds, as I'd said earlier. However, there are general funds that are in the budget that is proposed, roughly $40.9 million of new fiscal 2026 general funds, most of these to support governor's initiatives for miscellaneous projects, basically in the governor's strategic economic initiatives. So you can see those in the fiscal 2026 column. There's also a component of a deficiency for fiscal 2025 in general funds to replace inadvertent reversions that took place in the 2024 closeout of some prior authorized general fund capital projects, which the governor has proposed replacing. Partially, anyway. There is an Appendix 3 and also Appendix 4, which provide both a summary of the inadvertent reversions and how they're being replaced or not. There are a couple that are not being proposed to be replaced at this point, as well as a summary of the actual 2025 and 2026 through 2030 amount programmed for PAYGO in the out years, so you can get a sense of what the state has funded with respect to general funds and GO, and you can see that those variations over the last several years as the state's fiscal situation has changed. Turning to page 7, another essential feature of the governor's budget is proposed transfers to assist with the operating budget, roughly $196 million of proposed transfers, of which about $114 million come from the dedicated purpose account, and another $82 million from prior general funds for projects that the governor is proposing being replaced with GO bond funds. And you can see in some instances they're fully replaced, in a couple instances they're not. The big one is the new state veterans home. This project is essentially on hold. The state did not receive a federal award for this project, so the state has pulled out of programming any additional federal funds for that, and the budget scoops up out of the dedicated purpose account the amount that has not been encumbered for the design portion, because design is underway. And you'll hear more about that when the analysis for the veterans budget is presented, I believe, next week. The bottom of page 7, there's a bullet that talks about the status of previous appropriations to the DPA. Roughly about $1.5 billion was appropriated in 2023 and 2024, most of that coming in 2023. Most of the funds have been brought into the agency's budgets through budget amendment. However, a portion of those funds, both last year and this year, have been or are proposed to be transferred. And you can see from the chart at the top of page 8, this gives you a summary of what has been released through budget amendment and what is proposed to be transferred, and then the remaining amount that still resides in the DPA. I believe roughly $68 million is still in the dedicated purpose account. That plans are that those would be released by budget amendment at any time. Those dollars are still available to be replaced with GO bond funds, should the need arise to provide additional general fund support for the operating budget. In the middle of page 8, there's a summary of some of the more significant projects that the 5-year plan, or excuse me, the fiscal 2026 budget removes from the budget. The $1 million Schaefer Tower renovation and the renovation of the Nancy Grasmick State Education Building have both been pulled from the budget, as DBM and DGS are exploring rental options as opposed to the rather exorbitant expense of renovating those facilities. So that frees up funding throughout the 5-year plan to do other things as the state explores rental options. And as I'd said earlier, the Veterans Home project is currently on hold. The bottom of page 8, there's just a summary of the legislative priorities that were pre-authorized by the General Assembly last year. The budget provides $172 million of non-recurring local projects, about $130 million in GO, and another $34.5 in general funds for fiscal 2026. About 51.5 of that is for things that were items pre-authorized by the General Assembly last year. But not all of the projects that were pre-authorized have been funded in the governor's budget. Appendix 6 provides a summary of the legislative initiatives that were pre-authorized that are both funded and not funded in the governor's budget. On page 9, there's a summary of school construction. You can see from 2021 to 2026 fluctuations in the budget. The budget does meet the expectation that is established in statute that the governor provide $450 million for school construction. This is done through about $444 million of general obligation bond funds, and there's another $9 million of special funds from the Fiscal Responsibility Fund that round that out to $450 million. So they've met that met that requirement. And you can see that ostensibly the revenue bonds for the Built to Learn is the one item that shows fluctuations over the years. And that's really just the issuance stream for the bonds that were authorized for the Built to Learn program as they work their way through the budget. The other increase in fiscal 2026 is in the special fund area. The budget includes $27 million for the availability payments for the Prince George's County P3 project, which is part of the Built to Learn program, and begins to budget Prince George's County's share in there, which is the reason for the big increase in fiscal 2026. The 2024 number, if anybody's wondering, that was fiscal responsibility funds, which helped support the budget that year. So it was that year there was a significant amount that was available. There's only about $9 million that's being directed to school construction this year. Page 10 is a discussion of the transfer tax. I think, we've reported this last year, and the situation hasn't changed much this year relative to the revenues. The revenues have, from what was programmed a couple of years ago, have been revised, and those revised revenue estimates impact the programs that are funded through the transfer tax, ostensibly in DNR and agriculture, for a variety of projects or a variety of programs, which you'll see on the next page. But the impact is also felt in the underattainment, because the way we budget these, the fiscal 2026 budget is negatively impacted by an underattainment of fiscal 2024 revenues, which came in under the estimate by about $85 million. And so basically this just trues up the agency's budget. They received money above what they were supposed to get, let's say, in fiscal 2024, and the budget is truing that up in 2026. But it does have an impact on the expectations of the programs that are funded through the transfer tax, which you can see on page 11. I think we're all aware what's happening in Washington. Page 12 is just a summary of what is in the capital program over the next 5 years. As far as federal funds, roughly about $830 million of federal funds are at least planned in the 5-year CIP to flow through the budget over the next 5 years. The biggest component of those is in the Maryland Department of the Environment and the Department of Housing and Community Development. Obviously, there's some uncertainty in Washington. There's some uncertainty as to whether these federal funds will actually reach the state, given what's happened in Washington, particularly in the Department of the Environment, which still has a sizable amount of funds in fiscal 26 and programmed in fiscal 2027 through the federal IIJ program, which the state has a multi-year commitment from the feds, which extends through fiscal 2027. This is just to give you a summary of some of the programs in the budget that may be impacted in the future as these things are worked out at the federal level. Page 14 is a summary of what's going on in the Department of General Services for general services managed assets with respect to facility renewal. I think we've brought this up several times over the years. The state, has a pretty sizable backlog of projects as measured by the Department of General Services, roughly in the $268 million level. But the budget this year is proposed by the governor does include a significant enhancement to the proposed funding for the facility renewal program. You can see that roughly $130 million, in the 2025 CIP compared to $375 million in the 2024 CIP compared to the $375 in the 2025 CIP. Now this will help work the backlog down, and DGS has made some improvements over the last several years to increase their encumbrance activity, which is good, but I think also you need to take into account that the projects themselves are costing more. So while their encumbrance levels are improving, that doesn't mean that they're actually processing more projects. That's something we're looking into more as we present the budget for DGS in a couple weeks. But another significant component of this is the the proposal to use the facility renewal program to address a number of projects that would address the Climate Solutions Now requirements that were established in 2022. Roughly 120 million of projects on the backlog have been measured as projects that would address Climate Solutions Now. Potentially, this would be a place where the balance in the strategic energy fund would maybe be applied to projects here as opposed to using GEO bond funds, but that's something that we'll explore further as the weeks go by. Page 16 just gives you a summary of where the largest need is. As you would expect, the Department of Health, which has a rather large aged inventory of assets, is rather high on the list. Same with public safety, and then the Department of General Services. And as I said earlier, the DGS has made improvements to increase its encumbrance level, so hopefully, this will be something they're able to manage. I will, however, note that that there's still significant need for coordination between DGS and the using agencies. Something we'll bring to you later, I'll just touch on it now, is there's a significant project at Clifton T. Perkins where the boilers on that project went down, and this is something that's been known for a couple of years, and it's going to cost the state about $20 million of GEO bond funds, and then about another $24 million of operating funds as they had to do emergency contracts to bring in bring in units to be able to keep that facility up and running. And this really speaks to the need to have high-level coordination between the facility managers and DGS. It's one thing to be able to encumber more money. It's another thing to ensure that you're encumbering the money for the projects that are most needed and avoid emergencies, because this is a rather expensive emergency, particularly when you take into account the roughly $24 million that's going to be required in the operating budget just to bring in temporary units. The next couple pages are a summary for University System of Maryland. Also for their facility renewal program, they've got, I'm not sure I know the exact number, but I know it was over $2 billion of deferred facility renewal. This is also measured in in facilities that are currently being used but plan to be replaced, which of course when you do that you remove a big liability from the deferred facility renewal program. But you can see what USM has funded in yellow and the purple if you look at the ARB bonds, and then the green just shows what we consider to be the measured impact of buildings that are being replaced through the regular order in the projects that you approve in the capital budget, because again, those also have an impact on reducing the backlog. Now, on page 18, this just gives you a summary of where system is at each institution, measuring this as a facility condition index. And this compares where they were 7 years ago and the amount of change. So for the record, a low facility condition index is good, and if the orange or if the red bar is lower than the blue bar, that means that they've actually improved their facility condition index. If it's above, that means their facility condition index is actually worsening as new projects that are being added to the list exceed the projects that are getting funded and being removed from the list. And another way to look at this is on page 19, and that is the spending by each institution with respect to the replacement value, which is a measure against the assets which they have. And you can see roughly 3% in actual fiscal 2024. When 2025 and 2026 round out, they'll probably also be closer to 3% as the institutions typically add more money during the budget year, although this year that may be tough given the reductions that the institutions are facing in the budget. Facility renewal often is the place that agencies and institutions will cut to defer those to later. 3% isn't necessarily good. Industry standard would put this at more at 5 or 6% if you're really trying to address your backlog. Page 20 just shows that we're also funding, the state also funds a number of facility renewal programs at other higher education institutions, and this just shows what we funded over the last 5 years and what's programmed in the CIP. I note that only St. Mary's County actually scores their facilities under a facility condition index. Their condition index of 4.4 is very good, and in fact, it would be even lower once the proposed renovation of Montgomery Hall takes place. Morgan and BCCC do not provide a facility condition index. That's something we're working with them on in the future. Page 21 is a summary of the transportation program and how much the state's non-MDOT program is helping support transportation-related projects. And you can see that there's been a significant bump up in this beginning, in particularly in fiscal 2022, as the state has helped fund the Howard Street Tunnel project in concert with MDOT. The state has also provided $200 million for the hopeful move of the FBI headquarters to Prince George's County at $200 million, and the work there is actually, transportation related, as well as the $100 million respectively in 24 and 25 that was placed in the dedicated purpose account and the rainy day fund for additional transportation related needs. And all of this is happening outside of the normal transportation program. And I think the takeaway there is that, with the revenue packages that are on the table for MDOT, potentially, the state could consider using the Transportation Trust Fund as a means, in particular, to maybe fund the WMATA grants, which, while they're funded with GEO this year, are programmed to be funded with general funds beginning in FY27. And page 23 just shows a history of the WMATA grants. There are a number of appendices in the back of the document that illustrate a number of things. I don't plan on going over those. If there's questions, I'd be happy to address those now, or you can always reach me and I'll help you with whatever else you need. That's what I have for you today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Klein, for the comprehensive overview and the capital fiscal briefing. As always, just really good information. Are there any questions from members of the Capital Budget Subcommittee for Mr. Klein regarding their briefing? Douglas Solomon.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Matt, thank you for the always thorough briefing. Just a quick question to the point that you were making earlier about the amount of money that we put in when we had a pretty sizable surplus. Do you have a list or maybe any statistics around sort of like the improvements we made and some of the backlog requests, or the investments we've made, and sort of what was programmed in specifically with some of that the extra surplus money that we put in?
A big component of that in 23, 800 million of it actually was a fund swap, and much of that went to state facilities that were already programmed to get funding. But I'd be happy to work with you. I don't have a measure of, how well those projects did or didn't do. I do know that much of that money, particularly what was in the DPA, has been released, but a lot of it did not flow through the DPA, and a lot of it was for miscellaneous projects, which once they're authorized, they can take 7 years, and getting information on the status of those projects is difficult.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other questions, Delegate Metzger?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for being here. While I've been here, now that we're live and on the screen, so to speak, could you explain for the watching public exactly what is academic revenue bonds, built to learn bonds, just in a real capsule, if you don't mind?
Right. So
go ahead.
And the academic revenue bonds. So this gets authorized in separate legislation. It's for the University System of Maryland. It's also subject to the Spending Affordability Committee recommendations, and the Spending Affordability Committee had recommended a level of 30 million, which was consistent with what was, programmed in the 5-year CIP. And for system, ostensibly, most of those funds actually are used to support the USM facility renewal program. I think of the 30 million, 25 million is used for facility renewal, and I think another 5 is just off in another project to offset the need for GEO bond funds. But this is authorized in separate legislation. I do not know if it has been introduced, and this is an annual bill that you guys enact to give system additional debt. under the hood, the state really pays for that in the funding that we give the University System of Maryland, even though it looks like, it's scored as system debt, but in the, in the funds that we give system, these are essentially paid for by the state. And then the bill, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. Just as a follow-up, the bond premium proceeds. Explain that if you don't mind.
Okay, so the best way to explain that is when the state sells bonds in the market, we traditionally will sell those at a set coupon rate, 4.5% or 5%. I think 5% has kind of been the standard. When the actual interest rate that the investors pay is less than that, so let's say if the blended interest rate on all the bonds, because they're sold in tranches with different maturities, if the true interest cost of the issuance is, let's say, 3.5%, then the difference between the coupon rate and the interest rate is paid for in a net present value upfront funding from the investors. Okay, and then typically, those go to the annuity bond fund, and the last couple of years, the policy was to use those to offset debt service. Like it's said earlier, that they've been used to support the capital program as well, and are being proposed in part to be used to support the capital program this year. But essentially, again, that is the difference between the coupon rate and the true interest costs that we'll pay, and we get that in an upfront payment, and we can use those for debt service or for capital needs.
Thank you.
And you had asked about the Built to Learn bond. So this was authorized several years ago, and this is providing a source of additional funding backed by lottery to the various school systems to essentially bump up the amount of funding that the state was putting into school construction. Roughly $1 billion of authorizations for all of the counties except for Prince George's County, because they elected to do a public-private partnership, and we're funneling money from the lottery also for that as well.
And in my district, I get that question all the time. I thought the lottery was supposed to take care of the schools and education, so thank you for clearing
Lottery
that.
does back the Built to Learn bonds.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Klein. Really appreciate it. And that ends the capital fiscal briefing. We'll now move on to the agencies. First, we'll have the Department of Planning, and our budget analyst is Ms. Elizabeth Weibel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the capital budget for the Department of Planning, MDP has 3 grant and loan programs that are receiving funding in fiscal 26. I'll also provide an update on some ongoing and planned state-owned projects in the Jefferson Patterson Park and Museum, or JPPM. The 3 grant and loan programs collectively receive about $6 million in GO bond funding and $150,000 in special funds, as you'll see in the chart on the first page. The African American Heritage Preservation Grant Program receives $5 million in GO bonds. The Maryland Historical Trust, or MHT, Capital Grant Program receives $1 million in GO bonds. And the MHT Loan Program receives $150,000 in special funds that are available from loan repayments. In previous years, we've also included the Historic Revitalization Tax Credit in this analysis, but that is in our MDP operating analysis this year to align with DBM. I'll start with the MHT Loan Program on page 5. This receives $300,000 in the fiscal 2025 budget. Recently, it's been issuing 1 loan or less per year, and it brings in about $170,000 annually in loan repayments. About $54,000 of that goes to MHT operational costs. A 2023 law also allows MHT to transfer funds to a qualifying nonprofit organization. And so far, Preservation Maryland has applied for and received one $300,000 transfer in fiscal 2024. Looking ahead, the estimated annual revenues to the program will only support up to $150,000 in annual encumbrances through fiscal 2028, and then as low as $120,000 by fiscal 2029. And after that, the fund would likely require recapitalization, particularly if more transfers are made to Preservation Maryland. And DBM has recommended not including GEO bonds for recapitalization in the CIP until the impact of the new law regarding transfers is better understood. The MHT Capital Grant Program is shown on page 6. The fiscal 2026 budget includes $1 million in GEO bond funding, which is an increase from $600,000 in fiscal 2025. Exhibit 1 on page 6 shows that the program has consistently received more applications for assistance than it has been able to fund. So there certainly is demand for this program. The African American Heritage Preservation Grant Program is shown on page 7. This is administered by MHT in conjunction with the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture. There have been some recent changes to this program. Legislation in 2022 increased the mandated funding for the program from $1 million to $5 million annually, beginning with fiscal 2024, and also eliminated a funding match requirement and increased the maximum per project cap on funding. Exhibit 2 shows that there was a large increase in the number of applications received once those changes went into effect in fiscal 24. And DLS has asked MDP to comment on how these program changes are going and whether any additional changes are needed. One option would be increasing the per project cap to the statutory limit of $500,000. The commission has opted to currently set the cap at $250,000. Another option would be to reserve 20% or up to 20% of the total grant fund to help meet emergency needs that might arise during the year or during the course of a project. The capital bill also includes some amendments to extend the authorizations for GEO bonds that were previously authorized. These authorizations were for the MHT Capital Grant Program in fiscal 2017 and 2018, for the African American Heritage Preservation Program in 2011 through 2018, and for the St. Leonard's Creek Shoreline Project at JPPM in 2015 and 2016. This would just allow MHT 2 more years to expend those funds through the programs. And regarding the grant program extensions specifically, DLS has asked MDP to comment on what strategies it uses to ensure the timely execution of projects and expenditure of grant funds. DLS recommendation is to approve all the authorizations and amendments to prior authorizations and to concur with the governor's allowance of special funds. And you'll see text of those recommendations on page 3. Real quick, I'll give an update on projects at Jefferson Patterson Park and Museum in Calvert County. These don't receive any funding in this year's budget, but the St. Leonard's Creek Shoreline Project that I mentioned is slated for a funding extension. A plan for that project, which would provide erosion control measures, a pier, and boardwalks, is currently under review with the Department of the Environment. The Asbury House renovation is no longer in the CIP. In last year's CIP, it was programmed to receive $550,000 in fiscal 2027 to renovate the house, which is on the JPPM property, in hopes of renting it out. And MDP reports that it will remain vacant, and the park staff will keep it up as best they can until funds are available for renovation. The Patterson House previously received capital funding, and that project has been completed and expects to open in May of this year. The Maryland Archaeology Conservation Lab renovation and expansion project is about 60% complete and is not expected to need more funds. It is expected to be, or construction rather, is expected to finish by September, and regular operations are expected to resume next spring. That concludes my presentation. I can take any questions that you have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Weibel, for your presentation. Are there any questions from members of the subcommittee for Ms. Weibel? This afternoon, we have joining us from the Department of Planning, we have Secretary Rebecca Flora.
Secretary Flora was unable to be here. She's in a meeting.
Okay, great. So Ms. Kristen Fleckenstein is here from the Maryland Department of Planning. We have Elizabeth Hughes from the Maryland Historical Trust. So Rod, okay. We do have Secretary of Maryland Department of Planning here, Secretary Flora. Thank you for being here. We also have Rod Cofield with the MDP Jefferson Patterson Park and Museum.
Yes.
And
And Jeff Can, Secretary Operations.
okay, great. Okay, Secretary Flora, if you're able to provide testimony.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Good to see you all. Sorry, I'm just running in here. But first of all, we just want to, you've already met our staff here, but just introducing the two aspects that were included in the legislative report, one being the Maryland Historic Trust Capital Grant Program and questions regarding what we were doing in the areas of technical assistance to respond to that. And then, of course, the African American Heritage Preservation Grant Program, which we've been very excited about the amount of interest in that program and responding to those questions also. I think in terms of the technical assistance, obviously Director Hughes, who is the closest to it, I want to give her a chance to really talk to that. But I feel like the team, I have total confidence in terms of sort of how we've really tried to rally to create, a better program so that everyone can access these types of funds. But I think we'll start with that one first, and I'll turn to Director Hughes to talk a little bit more specifics about the things that we're doing as per the question in the report.
Sure, thank you. So we have about 6 projects that date from between fiscal year 18 and fiscal year 21. So those are our oldest projects. And what I would say in terms of technical assistance, it's really just a lot of hand-holding with these organizations, many of which are small nonprofits without dedicated staff. So it's just being in touch with them on a regular basis, conducting site visits, and really just being there to help them through the process. There isn't any sort of magic bullet there. A number of these older projects were caught up in COVID and sort of the supply chain issues and so forth. So we're just trying to get them through the finish line.
So the other topic was the African American Heritage Program, and I think on this one, the increasing the cap and the elimination of the match have greatly impacted. I mean, this is another program where capacity is limited. We're doing a lot of catch up in terms of something that I think wasn't adequately reflected in our past, and we're trying to give organizations an opportunity to really be able to preserve this aspect of our heritage. And so, the limit in terms of the per project cap, we've encouraged applicants to request an amount of money that aligns with their project phasing. The thing about raising it is that we don't want to raise it just to raise it. It's already challenging to do these projects. And so the ability to ensure, it's sort of one of those things, quality over quantity. We want to make sure that what happens well, and that we give folks the support that they need. And once again, I'm going to turn to Director Hughes to give you a little bit more detail on that one and how the program actually has worked and how we've really staffed up to support that program and its success. Director?
Sure. So I would say about the cap, I think it's interesting when you look at the applications that come in, you might expect that everyone would come in for that full $250,000 as it is, and that isn't the case. Folks really are, although a majority are coming in and bumping up against that $250,000 cap, and most are over $100,000 in terms of the funding they're requesting. It's not apparent that the $500,000 cap is going to really make a huge difference, except for certain projects. In the end, that's a decision that's left to the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture, who is our partner, and they could make that decision to make that change. But we really do defer to them to take leadership on that and what they're hearing on the ground from project partners in communities across the state. The other aspect of this question has to do with the Emergency Reserve Fund. That also is left up to the Commission to decide how much money they want to set aside in a given grant year for emergency grants. In the past, the amount set aside was quite small, around $15,000, which could help with emergencies, but in the past 14 years, we've only seen one emergency grant application actually come in. This past fiscal year, they set aside $100,000. So we're in a much better place to assist an emergency project like a fire or flood or other sort of situation that would be unexpected. And I think we'll just have to see. So far, we haven't had any requests for it. We're halfway through the year, but anything can happen at any time. So we'll have a better sense of that next year.
Yeah, and I think the thing to emphasize here is the partnership. The partnership is working well and just really working collectively to try to get the best program and the best outcomes. And I think we're both very happy with how that partnership has been working together. That's it
Great.
for us. Questions?
Great. Thank you very much, Madam Secretary. Are there any questions from members of the Capital Budget Subcommittee? Delegate Solomon.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for being here, and good to see you again, Madam Secretary. Just the question on the grants, and I know this is sort of chicken and an egg thing, because I think some of us grapple with this when we work on our LBIs. Do you all take into account sort of the readiness for applicants? Like, I know you said some of this is folks waiting for, sometimes folks are waiting for another grant, but is there, obviously, we want to see the stuff, help as quickly as we can. Is that part of the rubric that's used to score applicants?
It is. Go
Yeah,
ahead,
project
Director.
readiness is one of the criterion. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
We don't want failure. So, the more we can ensure that right off from the bat, that there is that readiness and the support is there, better reason for success.
Great. Thank you, Delegate Solomon, for that question. I would say this, too, that hearing from members across the board that, they often do try to help their constituents with these types of grant programs. And on that note, looking at the Exhibit 2 here with the analysis of the applicants assisted, seeing that in 2024, it looks like it dipped down to 22% of applicants who are assisted, and it jumped up to 42% in 2025. Is there any explanation for that?
I'm going to defer to the director on that. Thank you for pointing that out. Sometimes it's just promotion and readiness and when we can get the word out to folks, but I'll let the director identify any other aspects that might have popped out.
I'm thinking that was, 2024 was the first year where we had $5 million. And so you had a lot of pent-up demand for those funds. And so for that reason, I think we saw that bump up. And then with fiscal year 25, you had the applicants who are ready to go with their projects now had their funding. And, we're not going to be applying again. So that would be my sense. But I can look into that with the actual project manager of that program and see if there's a more sort of substantive sort of answer to that question.
I think with that bump, it really did create that little anomaly but we can go ahead and look at specifics if you'd like and get back to you.
Yeah, that's great. And then on that note, too, I see with the, definitely commending the agency on how when the correlation with the grant of funding awarded, that there is a correlation, the increase in the applicants received in 2024, and then it dips in 2025. So just wonder as far as, the awareness of the program or if there's any other measures that need to be taken to let the public know about this program that's available.
Yeah. I think overall that big increase in the funding was large. And so really gearing up the staffing for that was one thing, and then also trying to continue to push out through our, really, it's a lot of through the on-the-ground networks also. We work through a lot of our partners on the ground to sort of help push out the word on these and all of you to make sure that people are aware of what's out there and what's available to them.
Great. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions from members of the subcommittee? Okay, thank you. That concludes the hearing for the Department of Planning.
Thank you for your time.
The committee will now move on to the Department of Information Technology. Our budget analyst is Ishadora Ra.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. I am Yashodhara Rai, and I'll be presenting the fiscal 26 capital budget analysis for the Department of Information Technology, or DOIT. DOIT's fiscal 26 capital budget includes one project, Maryland First Responders Interoperable Radio System Team, or MD-FIRST. This project uses 700 megahertz spectrum licensed to the state by the Federal Communications Commission to provide interoperable statewide public safety radio communications for public safety first responders. As shown here on page 1, the capital budget request for fiscal 26 for MD-FIRST is $14.9 million in general obligation bonds, or GO bonds. On page 2, we have highlighted 4 key observations. The first to address the current contract with Motorola that is expiring in November 2025. The current Motorola contract has 2 components, project work and system maintenance. The current project work component of this contract also supports the new radio sites that received funding in fiscal 24 and 25. DoIT is planning to exercise a no-cost extension for 1 to 2 years to continue project work on these radio sites. However, this no-cost extension does not cover the system maintenance support component of the contract. This leads us to the second observation. During the 2024 session, DoIT was in the process of drafting and issuing a new RFP with 9 functional areas. Since then, DoIT has determined that 7 of those 9 functional areas are Motorola proprietary, meaning that Motorola would be the only prospective bidder able to provide the required services. Now, DoIT has received and is currently reviewing a sole source 6-year maintenance contract from Motorola that incorporates the 2 remaining RFP functional areas that were not Motorola proprietary. DoIT expects to send this proposed contract to the Board of Public Works for approval in spring of this year. We request DoIT to brief the committees on the department's contingency plan if the approval process extends beyond November 25. DoIT should also comment if this contingency plan would cost the state additional amount. The third observation notes that replacement costs for dispatch consoles and base station radios that are reaching end of life are not included in the fiscal 26 budget. DoIT is working with the Department of Budget and Management to determine the replacement cost for these components. At the top of page 3, the fourth observation notes that MD First has about $35 million in unexpended balance from the state appropriations made in fiscal 22 and earlier. We request DoIT to comment on the anticipated timeline for expending these older state funds. At the bottom of page 3 is DLS's recommendation to approve $14.9 million in GEO bonds to support the 4 sub-programs, which we will discuss in a minute. Exhibit 1 on page 5 shows the 5 phases in which the original infrastructure build of MD First was completed, the latest being phase 5 in April 23. The bottom of page 5 notes that phases 1 to 4 of MD First needed to be upgraded to Ethernet because the vendor no longer supported T1 technology. DoIT notes that site installation and implementations are underway and that the project is on track to be completed in June this year. DoIT also expects closeout activities to be completed by November 2025 when the current Motorola contract expires. The systems are forever evolving, and DoIT has identified 4 sub-programs that aim to address deficiencies in the existing emergency communication system. Exhibit 2 on page 7 shows the capital cost for the 4 sub-programs from fiscal 24 to 30. These 4 sub-programs include additional radio sites, which are the bars in blue, an expansion of fiber optic to replace microwave transmission in reds, control sites in yellows, and installation of in-building antenna systems in greens. The total estimated cost for the project is $97.8 million through fiscal 30. Fiscal 29 and 30 costs for control sites are approximately $1.5 million higher each year than previous years because it includes 2 additional control sites. Exhibit 3 on page 8 shows a list of planned radio sites from fiscal 24 to fiscal 30 that will help DoIT mitigate the coverage gaps it gathered through system radio coverage data. Sites identified in fiscal 24 and 25 already have approved funding, and sites from fiscal 27 to 29 may be subject to change due to further site investigation activities. No radio sites are planned for fiscal 2030. This subprogram receives an additional $6.6 million in fiscal 26 and a total of $16.2 million from fiscal 27 through fiscal 29. Information on the second subprogram, the fiber optic expansion, is on page 9. This subprogram receives $6 million in fiscal 26 for 3 fiber projects and a total of $17.3 million from fiscal 27 through fiscal 30 for 12 projects. At the bottom of page 9 is the third subprogram, in building antennas. MD First uses bidirectional amplifiers, or BDAs, to supplement radio coverage in buildings and within smaller geographic areas. This subprogram receives $1.1 million in fiscal 26 for 2 BDA installations. Page 10 highlights the fourth subprogram, which is the geo-redundant control sites. In fiscal 26, DoIT plans to use $1.2 million for the Garrett County simulcast cell. This subprogram receives $2.6 million in fiscal 27 and 28 to add 1 control site each year and $5.7 million to add 2 control sites in fiscal 29 and 30. Page 11 highlights DeWitt's out-year fiber optimization program that transitions the current last-mile leased circuits to Network Maryland Fiber. This project is expected to start beginning fiscal 2030. The estimated cost for this project is approximately $3.2 million in fiscal 2030. Appendix 1 on page 12 shows the operating budget impact of this project. Fiscal 26 allowance includes $19.9 million in operating costs, which includes 8 regular positions. Of this, 87.9% of the operating budget is for contracts. This concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rye, for your presentation. Are there any questions from the members of the committee for Ms. Rye? Thank you. This afternoon we have from the Maryland Department of Information Technology, we have Norman Farley and also Melissa Lehman. And then
Eric Bathurst, Chief Technology Officer for Infrastructure for DeWitt.
okay, great. If you'd like to proceed, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Melissa Lehman, Acting Secretary for the Maryland Department of Information Technology. I'm joined here today with Eric Bathurst, Chief Technology Officer of Infrastructure, as well as Norman Farley, the Senior Director of Public Safety Communications. I want to thank you for giving us the opportunity today to provide you with this testimony. I would also like to thank Yashadora Rai, our Department of Legislative Services Analyst, for her efforts and her support. The Department of Information Technology has one capital project to review, the Maryland First Statewide Interoperable Public Safety Communications System. Maryland First is a mission-critical public safety radio system that supports the governor's goal of creating a safer Maryland. It does so by providing public safety users with a reliable, secure, statewide, and interoperable communications system. It is a proven lifeline for Maryland public safety users and is the go-to interoperability communication system for Maryland's first responders communities. From day-to-day operations to the call by MDTA dispatchers to close the Francis Scott Key Bridge, Maryland First has proved its mettle. The system now supports over 122,000 users and averages over 3.2 million transmissions per month. A major success in 2024 was the addition of a new radio site located in downtown Washington, D.C. The site was funded through a grant provided by the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments. The goal of this D.C. radio site is to support Maryland First users and provide interoperability and redundancy during national special security events and any emergencies occurring within the National Capital Region. The site went live on November 4th and immediately provided support for Maryland first responders supporting the November presidential election, the January 6th certification of electoral votes, President Jimmy Carter's funeral, the presidential inauguration, and the recent D.C. plane crash tragedy. Our FY 2026 capital budget request is for $14.9 million. This request includes funding for the ongoing work associated with the Coverage Improvement Program and the Resiliency Improvement Program. We support the budget analysis presented and its recommendation. We thank the committee for its consideration, and we stand by for any questions.
Thank you. Melissa, are you the only one testifying? Just checking to make sure.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Colleagues, any questions? Seeing none, thank you all very much.
Thank you so much.
Okay, we're going to continue to Maryland Independent College and University Association. We will begin with analysis from Ms. Martinez. You can begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Victoria Martinez with the Department of Legislative Services. So today I'll be presenting the capital budget analysis for the Maryland Independent College and University Association. MICUA administers the Private Higher Education Facilities Grant Program, which provides funding to Maryland's private colleges and universities to assist with costs of constructing and renovating academic facilities. As shown on the cover page, the capital budget provides $8 million in GO bonds for the program in 2026. Exhibit 2 on page 4 shows the on page 4 shows the 3 projects selected for funding, including $3.36 million for a music and performing arts wing at Stevenson University, $2.48 million for the Hodson Science expansion at Hood College, and $2.16 million for the Merritt Hall Health Science renovation at McDaniel College. Pages 5 and 6 have additional details on each of the 3 projects, and pages 6 and 7 provides an update on the status of projects with unexpended funds. I'll end with our recommendations. The Department of Legislative Services recommends approving all authorizations for MICUA. And with that, I'll end my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Seeing none, we will move over to testimony. I see Flavius Lilly.
Actually,
Did I say it
President
correctly?
Jaskin is here on behalf of Flavius Lilly.
Okay, great. But then Debbie, Ricker, Elliott, yes, Matt Power, wonderful. And Julia is here too? Okay, all right. Well, you all can begin when you're ready.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair Lewis, members of the subcommittee. We appreciate the opportunity to present MICUA's capital projects. I'm Matt Power, president of MICUA. We want to thank Ms. Martinez for her analysis, as always. We're thankful to present 3 phenomenal projects for your consideration, and we're grateful to the Governor and the General Assembly for our longstanding partnership to help create and revitalize academic spaces on our campuses and encourage and drive private investment in the state of Maryland. The partnership we've created helps our presidents increase private investment, because when donors know that projects have the commitment of the state of Maryland, they know that those projects are going to come to fruition. The state funding afforded these projects will result in $23 million in private investment in the state of Maryland, supporting 250 construction jobs and allowing us to address workforce needs, attract new students, and future taxpayers. We're appreciative for the $8 million in funding provided by the governor in the capital budget, but are seeking an additional $3.96 million beyond what is in the allowance. Historically, the General Assembly has often helped assist our projects above the governor's allowance because they know how important these projects are to each of our institutions and how much private investment these limited state dollars leverage. With that, I'll hand it over to President Ricker to talk about Hood College's project, and we're happy to take questions from the subcommittee at any point. Thank you.
No, please do not press. Pardon me?
Don't press.
It says, please do not press. I wasn't going to press. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman and subcommittee members. Thank you for your time today. And Matt, thank you for that prelude. Hood College is seeking an investment in our Hodson Science and Technology Center. That's a complex of 4 distinct buildings and structures. And this request is specifically for a building that we call the Annex. This structure was built in 1926 and formerly served Hood College as our central heating plant and laundry facility for the college. This complex is attached to a rapidly growing cluster of academic programs on our campus, including all of our STEM initiatives, biology, chemistry, biochemistry, computer science, and mathematics. It also represents this cluster of programs that supports our rapidly growing health science programs at Hood College. Collectively, nursing, biology, and computer science represent 3 of our top 5 majors of every entering class on our campus. So this request is seeking capital funding from the state to support outfitting that annex complex to add additional classroom, laboratory, and research spaces for these programs collectively. Additionally, our Hodson Science and Technology Center houses our newly formed Biomedical Research and Training Center. And this facility is directly committed to upskilling and reskilling the workforce in life science, biomanufacturing, and research in the state of Maryland, aligned directly with the Moore-Miller administration's strategic initiatives for economic growth in the life science sector here in Maryland. So these capital funds will directly go to outfitting that annex facility of this cluster of 4 buildings in our Hodson Science and Technology Center to support our growing need in STEM majors, as well as workforce development in the state of Maryland in these areas. Again, thank you for your time to offer this testimony today and for your support.
Good afternoon, and let me join my colleagues in thanking you for your support of MCUA's capital program. Stevenson's requesting a $5 million grant to support construction of a 1,200 square foot addition to our Black Box Theater. Let me tell you a little bit about the addition. It will house our music performance stage and classrooms, and in this space, we'll offer classes that every Stevenson student will take. It'll be an opportunity for our music minor to continue to grow, and it'll be a home for our many performance groups. Just to give you a sense of it, we have an orchestra, a choral singers group, a marching band, a pep band, a concert band, a color guard, and our dance team. They're all going to use these facilities. Why in this time would we build this facility? Currently, our students have to travel 30 minutes between our Greenspring and Owings Mills campus to participate in music and performance. And what that means practically is students are generally not as likely to participate. And also, the university has some struggles in recruiting students who might be interested in these programs. The addition of the music performance stage that I just described is going to address these challenges. It'll provide opportunities for our programs and our students to develop further. I also want to highlight that integrating our music performance stage, which our Black Box Theater, will create significant cost savings because these 2 facilities can share a loading dock, a lobby, food service, and a scene shop, amongst many other facilities. And finally, and I think equally important, the current project will allow Stevenson to host local art groups and provide music education programs for our Owings Mills community. We're very embedded in that community, but we want to do even more for them. As Maryland's 3rd largest independent institution, Stevenson is dedicated to supporting the career aspirations of our students, and for over 10 years straight, over 90% of our graduates have been employed or in graduate school within 6 months of graduation, contributing mightily to Maryland's workforce and our economic prosperity. So thank you for your continuing support of MCUA's capital program.
And thank you to the Maryland General Assembly for investing in Maryland's independent colleges and universities. It means so much to us. McDaniel College is requesting a $2.96 million capital grant for FY26, supporting a $5.92 million renovation project in Merritt Hall. The project will house new academic programs that meet Maryland's workforce demands in neuroscience, in addition to new programs in early childhood education, occupational therapy, and speech-language pathology, programs that are slated to have job growth between 19 and 41% over the next decade. We are keenly aware of Maryland's workforce needs and the economic impact of this investment. McDaniel has a long-standing commitment to teacher preparation and will help expand access to pre-K education, one of the key goals outlined in the blueprint for Maryland's future. And new programs in occupational therapy and speech-language pathology seamlessly align with the Moore-Miller administration state plan, which calls for the scaling up healthcare workforce training. As a direct result of the state's investment, once these programs are fully operational, approximately 100 graduates per year will enter Maryland's workforce in high-demand fields. Additionally, since 73% of McDaniel's students are Maryland residents, these programs will continue the goal of keeping Maryland residents in Maryland, reducing the number of residents leaving the state to obtain bachelor's and advanced level degrees further afield. McDaniel's Merritt Hall was originally built in 2003 and has not received an upgrade in 21 years. The renovation is essential to house these programs and will create new classrooms, simulation labs, research labs, and faculty offices in a cost-effective and strategic way. In closing, investing in McDaniel College's Merritt Hall renovation is a direct investment in Maryland's future workforce. We are grateful for your consideration and urge you to support our $2.96 million capital grant request. Thank you.
Colleagues, do you have any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, we are going to continue along to the Department of Agriculture, the last we have. Mr. Gray, you can begin when you are ready, and then Mr. Secretary will take you afterwards.
Mr. Chairman, I'll now present the Maryland Department of Agriculture's capital budget analysis for fiscal 2026. On page 1, you see there what Mr. Klein had talked about earlier, the transfer tax revenue coming down. Therefore, you're seeing a decrease in the funding available in fiscal 2026. There's also no funding provided for the Maryland Agricultural Cost Share Program. But then in the out years, you see the transfer tax revenue bumping up, and then you also see the Maryland Agricultural Cost Share Program receiving $8 million per year. Moving now to page 2, is basically the big point here. DLS recommends concurring with the governor's allowance for the Maryland Agricultural Land Preservation Foundation. Just in terms of a little bit of discussion here on page 4, the funding for the Maryland Agricultural Land Preservation Program goes down by $2.8 million, once again because of the transfer tax revenue change. And the MAX program, Maryland Agricultural Cost Share, goes down by $5 million. We received $5 million in fiscal 2025, and it was intended to receive $8 million for fiscal 2026, but it has sufficient balance to be able to work on the projects it has in the current pipeline. And I understand they're spending the money expeditiously as well. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
All right, there we go. Thank you, Mr. Gray. Mr. Secretary and team, you all can begin. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. And thank you to Mr. Gray for that efficient analysis. Very much appreciate it. It helps if there are only 2 items in our capital, and I guess it helps that there's only one being funded. I will say that, as you know, the Maryland Ag Land Preservation Foundation is a critically important part of our role as a department. Just to name some stats, as of 2025, we have 2,804 easements throughout the state through this program. That accounts for 376,000 acres preserved under MALF alone, and we have crested past the $1 billion mark, and that is state, local, and federal money that has gone into preserving those acreage. And what that means is those acres will be preserved primarily for use as agriculture going forward. Yes, it's pretty to look at, but it's meant to be productive agricultural land that can grow food and grow feed for food and for fuel. So we're continue to be very excited about that program and the level of funding for it. The other program that I wanted to mention that Mr. Gray noted was not appropriated funds this year in the governor's budget is our Maryland Ag Cost Share Program. And this is an incredibly important and very much valued and relied upon program to assist farmers in meeting our conservation goals. I would say their conservation goals, which they are, but they are the state's conservation goals. When you look at the water improvement plan that we have through the Bay program, which we collaborate with 6 states and the District of Columbia to produce results to make our Bay better. Our primary means of doing that right now is through our Maryland Ag Cost Share Program. While it is unfunded this year, as Mr. Gray noted, there is a fund balance through which we have accrued essentially because sometimes it's hard to get these projects on the ground, and sometimes the purveyor who's on the ground doing it can't get the job done or can't get it done in an amount of time, or potentially the cost change or projects get canceled, farmers change their mind. We do receive some of those funds back, so those have accrued, and we believe that we're able to operate over the next year with those funds without additional appropriations, with a giant asterisk being we will expend those funds this year, and we will be back seeking additional funds in future years, given the value of this program, not only to the industry, but I imagine you'll hear from some conservation and environmental groups as well. They point to this as being a big success. With that, I will pause and take any questions, and I have Heather Barthel here, who is our Assistant Secretary of Administration and Money, the fund division. So thank you for your time.
No worries. Thank you for the testimony, and good to see the team here. Colleagues, do you all have any questions? Seeing none, you are off easy today.
There you go.
Have a great one.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
With that, we are adjourned. Have a great day.